Okay, so the goal of this video is to give you a real-time example of the close reading process. Now, I have, of course, studied this book before and taught this book before, so it's probably going to come a little faster to me than it would if I was reading it for the first time. But I am starting with a clean copy of the text, and I really haven't studied it in a couple years, so there's at least that. It's not super fresh for me. This is an excerpt from Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and I am looking at the scene where the character Mildred is introduced, and my focus is going to be on finding meaning in the imagery and words used to describe Mildred. So we're going to start right here where he opened the bedroom door. It was like coming into the cold marbled room of a mausoleum after the moon has set. So the first thing I notice is the idea of a mausoleum, which reminds me of death, because a mausoleum is like the above ground tomb type building. And really cold and marble remind me of death too. First, cold, I feel like cold is the opposite of life, which is usually associated with warmth. Dead bodies are cold. We can also say cold is sometimes a synonym for unfeeling. Same thing with marble. It's hard, which can sometimes mean like impenetrable, emotionally, like hard to reach. But also, again, dead. After the moon has set. Now, I'm going to put a little question mark there, because what does the moon setting mean? Like, is it daytime? Like, is the moon... Like, what does that mean? I don't actually know what that means, so maybe I'll come back to it. Complete darkness, not a hint of the silver world outside. Okay, so maybe that's what he means. I'm going to choose a new color here so that I can distinguish between my notes. Darkness. The idea that the moon, that there's no more moonlight. Not a hint of light, the windows tightly shut, the chamber a tomb world where no sound from the great city could penetrate. So I believe I'm going to make a note here, because I think he used the word silver to describe Clarice earlier in terms of the moon. So both Clarice and Mildred are associated with the moon, but in different ways. The idea of tightly shut and impenetrable comes back to this marble idea of being hard to reach. And I think it's, you know what, we've got tomb here again, so more death imagery. But this is all in the midst of a great city. So there is life, but Mildred's not part of it. So just here you can see how that took me a fair amount of time. Now, if I'm reading this the first time through, I'm not likely to make this many notes. This close reading process that I'm going through right now is once I have a little more focus, maybe the focus of a discussion question or the focus of an essay idea, and I'm going back and finding passages that I think are worth a second go over. So this is like second tier close reading. I'm really gearing up to make meaning and to come up with things that I might be able to use for an essay. So the room was not empty, and that's Mildred that is in the room. Even though it's got like this empty feeling to it, Mildred is empty, even though she's there. The little mosquito delicate dancing hum in the air, the electrical murmur of a hidden wasp snug in its special pink warm nest. The music was almost loud enough so he could follow the tune. So Mildred's listening to these like earbuds with, I guess some like white noise. And what I think is interesting is the contrast between life or nature versus technology. And I feel like that comes up later, and that's in particular why I want to remind myself of that, make a note so that I can find it later. He felt his smile slide away, melt, fold over down on itself like a tallow skin, like the stuff of a fantastic candle burning for too long and now collapsing and now blown out. So this is interesting. This candle imagery is certainly relevant to Fahrenheit 451 on the whole. But if I'm just thinking about Mildred and I've focused myself, then I don't need to really think about this right now. I don't want to get distracted by things that aren't relevant to my goals. But we've got darkness again. So let's find that blue color that I was using. Is that the right blue? Good enough. Darkness. And then some more about Montag, so we're going to skip through. Without turning on the light, so darkness, he imagined how this room would look. His wife stretched on the bed, uncovered and cold like a body displayed on the lid of a tomb. So, again, stretched on the bed, uncovered and cold. He's not even, alluding to death here. He's basically saying she looks like a dead body. And we get the word tomb repeated to sort of emphasize it. Her eyes fixed to the ceiling by invisible threads of steel, immovable. And that, maybe I want to note that I remember in an earlier section there was a lot of movement with Clarice, but Mildred here is still. And so I'm starting to think like, okay, my focus is Mildred, but in the back of my mind, I know that she's related to Clarice as a foil character. So maybe that's going to be useful to me, and I'm going to make note of it. We'll see. And in her ears, the little seashells, the thimble radios tamped tight, an electronic ocean of sound. So we have that again, this contrast between nature and something more technological that we keep repeating. I like this passage for close reading because it's so dense, and Bradbury is really not shy here about repeating the same imagery, which helps me make my case. Shore, so that ocean imagery. Maybe the idea of water means something. Every night the waves came in and bore her off in the great tides of sound, floating her wide-eyed towards morning. There had been no night in the last 2 years that Mildred had not swum that sea, had gladly gone down in it for the first time. And I'm going to find my yellow again, because this implies drowning. Like, yes, she's swimming, but it's not good still. The room was cold. We've got cold again. And I'm constantly trying to remind myself to go back and find those connections and find the patterns. But he could not breathe. He did not wish to open the drapes and open the French windows. He did not want the moon to come into the room. So with the feeling of a man who will die in the next hour for lack of air, he felt his way towards his open, separate, and therefore cold bed. And again, he can't breathe. There's a lack of air. I'm not sure that's my strongest evidence if I'm just talking about Mildred, but the room she's in is somehow, like, even the room is dead. An instant before his foot hit the object on the floor, he knew he would hit such an object. It was not unlike the feeling he had experienced before turning the corner and almost knocking the girl down. There's Clarice. His foot, sending vibrations ahead, received back echoes of the small berry across its path. Even as the foot swung, his foot kicked. The object gave a dull clink and slid off in the darkness. Is darkness yellow? Darkness is blue. He stood very straight and listened to the person on the dark bed in the completely featureless night. The breath coming out of the nostrils was so faint it stirred only the furthest fringes of life, like a small leaf, a black feather, a single fiber of hair. So there's life again. There's darkness again. And what I like about this is that this is his wife. Is that how you spell impersonal? Is it an M? It doesn't matter in my notes. That's a really impersonal way to talk about your wife, right? He stood very still and listened to Mildred or her or his wife even, but this person, like she's a stranger. He still did not want outside light. And I sort of wonder why he doesn't want it, but maybe that's getting too much into Montag. He opens up his lighter. 2 moonstones looked up at him in the light of his small handheld fire. 2 pale moonstones buried in a creek of clear water, over which the life of the world ran, not touching them. So there's life, but it's not touching Mildred. So it's still sort of like death imagery here, even though he's talking about life. And so what are these moonstones? The moonstones are her eyes. And it can be hard to get that right away, but the moonstones are her eyes. So what does a moonstone look like? If I look it up, moonstones are very, they're pretty as stones, but they're very like milky, cloudy, and if you've ever seen eyes with cataracts, they sort of look like that. And cataracts make it quite hard to see. And of course, vision can sometimes be a symbol or metaphor. And that's the opposite of Clarice. Who is all about clarity, right? So who can see, who can understand, who's enlightened, versus who's not. So again, I'm coming back to this idea of like comparing Mildred to Clarice, and that might be useful to me later. Her face was like a snow-covered island upon which rain might fall, but it felt no rain. So snow, cold again. The idea of nature. I lost myself. There we go. Rain, clouds. But again, she's not part of this nature. Like it exists around her, but she's sort of separated from it in her like spacey, dead but not dead state. And she doesn't even care if she's alive or dead. And then here, eyes all glass. I'm going to connect that back to moonstones. I think it confirms my suspicion of what we're supposed to make of the image of moonstones. So I'm gonna stop there. Okay, the rest is a little more Montag centered than I need. And what I'm gonna do is, for my next step, I'm gonna pull these quotes out and put them in a separate document and start to go through them again. Maybe try to draw a little more out of them in terms of close reading.